Love that. Let's be a city on our knees. Thank you for singing that so well. Our first time at the Grove. Thank you, Josh, for leading that. I loved hearing the prayers that we heard a few minutes ago from some of our city leaders and people involved in our city in different ways. I want to say a big thank you to Principal Kowalinski. Thank you on your busiest week of the year for praying. Thank you, Dr. Grace Haynes, for praying. Council Member Ellen, thank you so much for praying. And then Officer Aerosmith, thank you. And I hope that you see where we're heading this morning and with this series we're doing for the next 4 or 6 weeks on city. And this morning I want to talk about how God loves the city. God is for cities. We all know, for example, that God is for individuals, right? God is for people. He's for mothers and fathers, and He's for sons and daughters, and He's for families. But we don't think about God being for a city. I've never heard a preacher preach about God being for a city. But God is, and cities have personalities just like people do, don't they? I brought some pictures to show you what I'm talking about. Like, you know some cities just by meeting their people. Like, in what city are they always yelling and loud and obnoxious? New York City, of course. What city is everybody always in a hurry? They cut you off on the freeway, they honk, and they call us zonies. That's L.A. Of course it's L.A. And then there's the city known for its most annoying sports fans, the most annoying fans you'll ever meet: Cubs, White Sox, Bulls, Bears, Chicago, right? Oh, we're getting some cheers. They miss Chicago. All right. It's summer there now. Count your blessings. And then what city is known for just really kind of bizarre people? This guy, I took his picture when I was there. He has a bow tie in his hair. He's making bow ties for dogs. I'm not making this up. He says he recycles milk cartons and his T-shirts to make the bow tie. So I bought one. But what city is this? Portlandia. It is Portlandia. And then there's a city, I told you cities have personalities, where people still ride horses to work. And it's a city you've heard of, Tucson. And, some call it Tucson, but whatever it is, that's from Tucson. That's what happens there. All right, we're just kidding. Some of you were born there, and you take this personally. But here's where I want to start this morning. We're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 29. You can turn there. We're going to look at the city of Babylon. But first, I want you to understand the critical nature of cities. If you look back in our history just 200 years, 1800, just 2% of the world's population lived in cities and urban centers. 100 years later, that number was, in 1900, that number is 12% of the world's population lives in cities. And today, that number is exponentially higher. Today, more than half the world's population. It's been the biggest migration in human history from rural areas to urban areas. 52% of the world's population lives in cities. Cities and people in cities, that's you, have incredible influence. I don't know if you've noticed this, but it's a fact of society that people who live in cities have disproportionate influence over politics or over the arts and literature. They influence education. They influence everything that happens out in the rest of the country or the countryside. It starts in the city. And God knows this, and God has always been for cities. We know that, like, the city of Jerusalem was always a center of worship. And 2,000 years ago, God used cities to spread the news of Jesus Christ. If you think about the early church, we just went through the letters over the last few months, right? Almost all of those letters were to cities, the most influential cities. Paul writes to Ephesus and to Corinth. And then the city of all cities, he writes to Rome. By 300 AD, every Roman city practically was known as a center, a bastion of Christianity. In fact, people from the countryside were called pagans. That used to just mean you're from the countryside, places like Wickenburg, I don't know, like that. They were just known as, but if you lived in a city, in a Roman city in 300 AD, you were known as a Christian because those were Christian centers. We've lost that impetus. But I think now, today, my point is God is doing new things in cities, and he's growing his kingdom in cities, but it's through you. It's through his people of influence. I have this key idea that I want you to take home with you, just a thought, write it down. Actually, it's in your handout. But Christ followers are called to live, serve, that's you, and be deeply involved in the life of your city, this city, whether it's Chandler, Gilbert, Phoenix, Tempe, Queen Creek. And we need to contribute to the thriving of the whole city, not just our pockets of community or our neighborhood, bringing the peace and the justice and the love of God into this city and spreading it there. The problem is that Christians have not always viewed cities as places where they should go. In fact, I've grown up in the church, and I've always sensed that there's almost an anti-urban, anti-city bias. I think there's kind of three views that Christians tend to hold of cities, one of three. I have them on the screen here. The first is that I think there's some Christians that almost think we're supposed to be against the city. And it's just not that way, but they look at cities as centers of sin and crime, and then the rural areas as places where God thrives. And they see it, for example, as Gotham and Mayberry. You know, Gotham, all the bad, dark things happen in cities, so Christians should stay away in places like Mayberry. I used to live in Mayberry. It's a town called Wheaton, Illinois. It's about 50 miles outside of Chicago. And I'll tell you what, I don't know if they ever arrested anyone in that city. There was no crime, it seemed like. In fact, to make sure there was no crime, they banned all bars and serving of alcohol in the city limits. And then they went after the other evil, arcades. They closed down all the arcades because teenagers were doing bad things in arcades. I don't know. And then of all the evils, the worst one that they banned was skateboarding through Wheaton. So you can do any of that. College students called it the Wheaton bubble because it was so isolated. But there's kind of this idea that Christians do not need to be a part of their city. And so we're against this city because we see it. Some have seen it as places of sin. We can call it like the Jonah complex. You remember Jonah in the Bible, right? God sends him to this city of Nineveh, and he says, tell the people to turn to me. And Jonah gets on the wrong ship. He gets on the wrong plane. He's going the wrong direction. And so God's about to capsize his ship, and they throw Jonah overboard. A fish spits him out on the shores of Nineveh. So finally he goes and he preaches to Nineveh, and the people repent and they turn towards God. And Jonah's even more angry because he wanted them punished. And I almost feel like that's the way some Christians view the city. There's this, like I said, almost an anti-urban bias, and I want to help us change that. There's been a piece of theology floating around that said something like this, that the Bible, God wrote the Bible to people who lived in gardens, it started in a garden, and people who tended sheep in pastures. And it was like that, and they said, and there was this piece of theology that said, for example, David was doing so great when he was herding sheep out in the middle of nowhere, but then he went to the city, and he got Netflixed, and he saw, Bathsheba, and it all went downhill from there. That's what happens in cities. But that's not the truth about God and cities in the Bible. I want you to get this morning that God is for cities. God is for cities and for thriving cities. That God has put you in your city to serve it and bless it. So here's a second view that I think some Christians have of cities. I'll just say that some are apathetic, like there's cities are secular and we're spiritual, and the two don't mix, and so they just kind of ignore the city. But then there are churches and there are Christians who are for their city. And my hope is that the Grove is known as being a church that is for this city. And I hope that people who attend the Grove are known as being people who are for their city. Like I said, cities were God's idea. Jerusalem was always a center for worship. We'll look at Jerusalem. Today we're looking at Babylon. We'll look at Jerusalem next week and how it was a place of worship. And where today I said I want to talk about Babylon, and what happened in Babylon is in 586 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem, and he takes thousands of the Hebrew people captive, and he hauls them back to his city, Babylon. And so they're trapped there, and they're captives. And then Jeremiah, who's a prophet, writes a letter. God speaks to him, and he writes this letter to the leaders and to the Hebrew people that are in exile. And he sends them this letter. Let me read you the opening words of the letter. We'll start Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 1. Jeremiah wrote a letter from Jerusalem to the elders, priests, prophets, and all the people who had been exiled to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 4. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Verse 5, build homes, plan to stay, plant gardens, and eat the food they produce. Marry and have children, then find spouses for them so that they may have many grandchildren. Multiply, do not dwindle away, and work for the peace and work for the prosperity of the city where I carried you into exile. Listen to this. Pray to the Lord for it, because its welfare will determine your welfare. So the Jewish people are hundreds and hundreds of miles from home in captivity, and they get this letter saying, before your city, settle down in your city, build homes. God hasn't put you there by mistake. And so that brings me to my first thought that I hope you take home this morning, and it's this, that God put you in this city. Twice in this short passage, we read these words. This is verse 4. To those I carried into exile. God says, I carried them there. Verse 7, the city where I carried you. So the Jewish people had to have heard this and go, wait, God, you carried us here? No. Nebuchadnezzar, he dragged us here. And God is trying to get them to see that, no, I put you there. And I put you there on purpose. And God doesn't make mistakes. And I hope you see that God put you in your city, this city, for a reason and with a purpose. Have you ever ended up in a city like the Jewish people in Babylon, and when you move there and when you settled in, you go, how in the world did I get here? This is the worst city I could have ever picked. Have you ever had that thought? I know it happened to me and Veronica. We moved from Southern California to Chicago. The thing is, they had me candidate and visit in June, and they said it's like this all year round. And so we're there, and the first winter hits, and I get in my car to go pick someone up at the airport, and my engine block freezes. It seizes. It overheats, and it locks up. I'm on the side of the freeway. Listen, it's minus 12 with a wind chill factor of minus 30. I think I'm going to die. When I finally get it to the mechanic the next day, I get it towed. I said, what happened to my engine? How did it overheat and seize? He said, because your antifreeze froze. And I'm like, what in the world? The antifreeze is not supposed to freeze, but at minus 12, it freezes. And so, but here's the thing, we were there for 7 years, and we grew to love our city. And then we moved to Chandler, and we visited here in November, and we got here, and we did, and it was beautiful. And I still remember kids were playing in the front yard. I thought, there's a place in this world where children play in late November in their front yard. We need to move here. And I said, I hear about your summers. And people said, oh, it's nothing. It gets a little warm. It's a dry heat. The dry heat thing, it's just bogus, isn't it? It's meaningless. We get here, and I remember being in our front yard. My boys are yelling, Dad, what's coming? And I come outside. It's like July, and I see a wall of dirt building, and it's this dark wall of dirt, and its wind is blowing. There's lightning in the dirt, and I can see rain, and it's evaporating. I didn't know this could happen. It's evaporating before it hits the ground. It's called Virga. Who knew? And then this dirt comes through, and you can't even see, and the kids are playing in it. I think they're going to die. And there's tumbleweeds. I live right by Santan here, and there's tumbleweeds coming down our street. I thought, where am I? This is like the apocalypse. And it's just Chandler. But then you know what? We got to know our neighbors, and we love our neighbors. And then we got to know our school principals, and one after another, they were Christians. And we had kids in Santan from kindergarten to 8th grade, and they had godly teachers. Then we got to know our mayor, and he's a believer. And then our city manager started coming to the Grove, and then we started to get to know all of you who go to the Grove. And Veronica and I, we love our city. We love being here. And I think so often we think that God has made a mistake when he puts us somewhere. And so we don't get engaged, we don't unpack. But here's what he tells the people of Jerusalem in Babylon. He says, build homes, plan to stay, plant gardens, and eat the food they produce. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that they'll marry, and you'll have grandchildren. And you know the Hebrew people had to be going, this is getting worse. We're going to have bilingual children. What's going on? And God is saying, settle down, make it home. I carried you here. It wasn't Nebuchadnezzar. It was because I allowed Nebuchadnezzar. So he says, you're not refugees anymore. You're not just strangers in exile planning to leave soon. This is home. And so ask God, what is my purpose in this place? Here's the thing. I think a lot of us, just like the Jewish people, God puts us in a city. It could be Gilbert, Queen Creek, Chandler, Tempe. I don't know where you are, but you may be thinking, well, I'm just here briefly. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. And I hear some of you talk about the cities that you're from, like it's paradise. I hear some of you talk about Dallas, like the streets are paved with gold. Can I just say, I landed at Love Field. I don't know where I landed, but it's not paved with gold, okay? Downtown, wherever that was. Some of you talk about Denver, you know. John Denver sang songs about Denver. Okay, but I flew into Denver, and you people say it's God's country, but when I landed, it's just cornfields. It's not even in the mountains. The mountains are near, but Denver's not even there. When football season starts, you'll see people in Detroit jerseys, and they talk about Detroit like it's the promised land. They're selling houses for $500 in Detroit, okay? It's not. My point is, here in the East Valley, we all come from somewhere else. And some of you are still thinking about this place you're from and how that's really home, and you're just here briefly, and how that was so much better. And I want to say, no, settle down, as God says. Grow your family, build a home, plant gardens, prosper, flourish. All right, and so I'll say this next. God put you in this city on purpose. And then God put you in this city to help it flourish. That's what Jeremiah writes in his letter. He writes this, verse 7, and work for the peace and prosperity. You have to underline and circle that. Work for the prosperity of the city where I carried you into exile. You know, I think a lot of times God puts us places and we don't realize that he put us there to help that place flourish. I think we often think about flourishing and thriving in individual terms. Maybe you're a business owner and you think, well, my business is here so that I can thrive. My business will thrive. But I want to say, no, your business isn't supposed to thrive for you and your family, but it should thrive for your employees. It should thrive for the city that God has put you in. And I want to say this about our church. One of the great goals we have as a church is to help this city flourish. There's a question that every couple of years I ask the people of the Grove. It's just a hypothetical question. But I ask this. I ask, what would it be like? What would people say about the Grove if one day we had to close our doors? Let's say for some reason, I don't know why, we had to close our doors and move to Kingman. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But let's say that happens. What would people say? I hope that the people of Chandler and Gilbert would say things like, man, I miss the Grove. I hope people would say, I miss the people of the Grove. And I hope they would say that because the people of the Grove and the Grove was good for our city. The people in the Grove were good for our community. I sure hope that somebody would notice. What if a church closed its doors and nobody noticed? Or even worse, they said, good riddance, glad they're gone. They're so annoying. But I hope that if we were not here one day, people would say, I wish the Grove was still here, because the Grove has been so good for Chandler and Gilbert and Tempe and Queen Creek. The thing is, we don't always see our role in that sense, and so we don't say, God, help me to flourish in this city. But when we read these words, let's go back to verse 7. Jeremiah says, pray for the Lord to prosper it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. Do you understand that? He's saying if the city prospers, pray for it, because if the city prospers, then you will prosper. And so I want to challenge you to think about, in what ways do you need to help this city flourish? Is it through your work and through your business? Is it by being a voice for justice? Is it by seeking the best for the people in your neighborhood or your community and participating? I hope you understand that as Christians, as the church, we are God's physical extension of who He is. We are meant to represent God to our neighborhoods and to our cities and to our communities. I love it when I hear stories of what's happening through the people of the Grove in our neighborhoods. I love it when I hear stories from Live Love and our Live Love days. I think back a year and a half. Do you know that we set aside one Sunday a year and a half ago? We said we're going to cancel church service so the people of the Grove can go serve. And so we called off church, and we had 80 teams on that Sunday go throughout the community, working in schools, planting gardens, going into people's homes, repairing their air conditioners, repairing their cars, just blessing our neighbors in our neighborhoods. Because what is good for us, what is good for you as a follower of Jesus Christ, should be good for your neighbor. And if what's good for your neighbor should be good for your neighborhood, and then what's good for your neighborhood should be good for our city. I hear stories like we had a group of high schoolers last summer. Maybe they were bored, but they pulled out a Weber grill, threw it in a pickup, and went to downtown Chandler and set it up by a Circle K where people were looking for work. And they started to grill hot dogs and just give hot dogs out. Why? Just to bless the people of our city. There's a church, and I can't remember the name of the church, but it's in the Midwest. They have people that once a week they go downtown in their city and they feed coins in the meters so people don't get tickets. They'll see if the meter's going, they'll go feed that. And when I heard that, it made me think of a story that happened 3 days ago. And I just share this so that you and I can be a part of blessing people in our city. But 3 days ago, there was a young mother in a city called Barrie, Canada. And her name is Kaylee, and her 6-month-old baby boy is really sick, so she took him to the ER. It was $15 to park there. That's in Canada. You know, in America, I think parking's free at our hospitals. Anyway, she didn't want to pay that, so she parked on the street and she fed the meter, but it could only go for 4 hours. Well, at 3.5 hours, she was like, her kid was still in ER, and the meter was running out, so she got on Facebook and she asked a question on her phone, will my car get towed? I'm at the hospital. My baby is in ER. And right away, mothers who live near the hospital, and mothers she didn't even know, started to respond and said, we will feed the meter. And then they came in and they started to bring her meals. And they stayed there until they made sure that her son was okay. And now they're helping her with her hospital bills. But you had mothers come from all over to feed the meter of someone they didn't even know. My point is, in what way are you blessing this people of this city and helping this city to flourish? So let's continue our sentence. God put you in this city to help it flourish and to pray for this city and to pray for justice with peace in this city. I want you to go back to the passage we were in verse 7, and we read this simple line, and work for the peace of the city, and pray to the Lord for it. Do you hear those words? Now, this word peace, and work and pray for the peace of this city. This Hebrew word peace, most of you know it's translated as shalom. And shalom, sometimes we simply talk about shalom as being peace. But shalom really means peace with justice. I don't know if you know the city Jerusalem has the name Shalom in it. I have this on the screen. But Jerusalem, it's one congregation of that is Shalom. And so Jerusalem is known as God's city of peace. Peace with justice. And so God is telling these Jewish people, these Hebrew people from the city of peace, he's saying, now go through Babylon and spread peace with justice. And so do you get the mental picture here that the city of God, the city of peace and justice is now spreading in Babylon. And so you too are meant to be God's means of spreading peace with justice in this city. That's all I'm going to say on that, because I want to come back and talk about this idea of peace with justice on another Sunday. So here's what I'll say next. God put you in this city to help it flourish and to pray for peace with justice and make it beautiful. I want to keep reading here in Jeremiah 29. We read through verse 7. When we get to verse 11, we get to one of my favorite passages in all the Bible. And here's how Jeremiah continues his words from God to the people in Babylon. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good, plans to prosper you, not for evil, not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope. How great are those words? And so God is saying, I put you in this city, and I have got this beautiful plan for your life. And part of it is for you to change what is broken and not right in this city. I was in Portland a month and a half ago helping my son move down here. And we went to Alberta Street one night to look for something to eat. And as we walked down Alberta Street, which Alberta Street used to be one of the most blighted streets, blighted neighborhoods in all of Portland. But now there's really cool restaurants popping up in what used to be houses. But as we're walking the street, I began to notice that the walls of these old buildings in this blighted neighborhood were now painted with murals. You see, the city of Portland had released artists. They said, any wall you can find along Alberta Street, you can paint it. And so there was mural, some of them were strange, mural after mural of art. And so here the most blighted neighborhood becomes the most beautiful neighborhood. And I simply share that to say, in what way does God want you to take a neighborhood? By the way, this is the guy that was selling dog bow ties. Just awesome. And I said, can I take your picture? And he goes, yes. You know, who does that? But in Portlandia, yes. So I want to ask you, what chief problems of prejudice or injustice or inequality does God want you to address? What neighborhoods or neighbors does he want you to pour into to help make their family more beautiful? If you, as I said earlier, if you own a business or if you are working in this area, then know that you don't just profit for your family and for your own good, but your business should flourish for your employees and for the city. If you're an artist, then don't just paint art for yourself or your own home or to sell and make money, but paint art in the name of Jesus Christ for the good of this city to make it more beautiful. If you are a teacher or an educator, then don't just pour into our schools, or maybe you volunteer, just don't pour in so that your children will have a better school, but pour in so that all the children of the East Valley will have better schools. If you are a college student, don't just come here for 4 or 5 or 9 years, however long it takes, and just leave with an education, but pour into this city, that God has put you here with a reason for a purpose. Our vision at the Grove for this city is to start a movement for Jesus Christ, that through our words and our actions and through our friendships and through our businesses and through our neighbors, And through our acceptance and embracing of the least and the last in everyone, even the immigrants, that people will know that God has something good for this city. I'll end by reading this passage again because I believe it's so powerful for all of us. Verse 7. I'll start in verse 5. Build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat the food they produce. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that you may have many grandchildren. Multiply. Do not dwindle away and work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I carried you. Pray to the Lord for it and for its welfare. And so today, go plant gardens, settle down, build friendships with your neighbors and in your neighborhood. Love the immigrant neighbor, embrace them. And ask God, what is it that you want me to do most in and for this city?